Welcome to this week's Parsha Shiur, Parshas Nasso. Three fabulous ideas that I'm looking forward to share with you. The first idea is a magnificent Abar Benel in the very beginning of this week's Parsha. The Abar Benel, in his style, is to ask lots of questions and then with a theme to sort of explain and go through all the various questions. So that's what I'm going to do. I haven't taken all the questions. He's got, I think, 8 or so questions in this section. I've only taken 5 of them, but it's worth going through because they're very interesting questions and his answer is illuminating. So let's take a look. If you're listening online, please email me at j.golker@gmail.com and I'll send you the handouts. The pasuk and the parsha begins, "Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Leimer, Nasso es reish b'nei Gershom gam heim leveis avosim lemishpachosom." Count the heads of the children of Gershon. Of course, Levi had 3 children, Gershon, Kos, and Merari, and now it's Gershon's turn. So it says the Abar Benel, "V'yesh lishol b'psukim eila she'elos." We can ask lots of questions on these psukim. Hashelo echad, the first question. Lama tziva yisbarach limnes rishon b'nei Kahos, va'achar kach tziva limnes b'nei Gershon. Really, Kahos have already been counted. They were counted in the end of last week's Sedra, Parshas Bamidbar. And our Parsha kicks in the middle by counting Gershon. So why is it that way around? Gershon was older. B'yos Gershon ha'godol me'hoachim, k'moshe omru b'nei Levi Gershon, Kahos, Umrori. So the order is wrong. We started counting Kahos in last week's Sedra, and now Parshas Nasso begins with a counting of Gershon, who is older. Why did we jump the gun and go with Kahos at the end of last week's Sedra? We should have counted in a chronological way, the eldest first, and then the next one. So why is Gershon not first? Why did Kahos jump the gun and get in there at the end of last week's Sedra? That's the first question. Hasheila habeis, the second question. Lama b'minyan b'nei Kahos nitzdavu yachad Aaron u'Moshe. When we counted Kahos at the end of last week's Sedra, it says, "Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe ve'el Aaron." The instruction is to both of them. Uv'vnei Gershom hoisad tzavo levad leMoshe. But in this week's Sedra, the parsha begins, "Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe leimer." Count Nasso es reish b'nei Gershon. What about Aaron? Omnam, but b'nei Merari, and to compound the question, for the b'nei Merari, the third child of Levi, lo bo dibur lo le'Aaron v'lo leMoshe. There's no instruction neither to Moshe or to Aaron. So very strange. So second question is, how come with the counting of Kahos it says Vayidaber Hashem el Aaron vel Moshe, and yet Moshe vel Aaron, and in this week's Sedra it says Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe leimer. When it comes to Gershom instructing Moshe, and when it comes to Merari, no one is instructed. Strange. Third question. Hasheila hagimel. Loma al b'nei Kahas milvad hadibur sheba al minyonom, bo dibur acha al tachrisu es shevet hakahosi. Why is it that when we counted Kahos at the end of last week's Sedra, there was a further instruction, al tachrisu es shevet hakahosi, don't cut away the tribe of Kahos, or v'gershom lo nema kazev v'lo b'bnei Merari. It seems to be a special instruction for Kahos, that we've got to be very careful not to cut them away. But we don't see that with Kahos and with Gershom and with Merari. Question number 3. Question number 4. Hasheila hadalat. Lama beGershom nema Nasso reish b'nei Gershom gam heim. This strange word in the opening psukim of our Sedra, Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe leimer Nasso es reish b'nei Gershom gam heim. What is that about? V'lo nema gam heim b'nei Merari. We don't find that expression with Merari and with the other Shvatim. And lastly, question number 5. Ma ro'a miseda hastarim lasos rosh haseda hazem b'nei Gershom v'lo yisham tchilas haseda minyan b'nei Kahos. Really, Parshas Nasso should have started, several psukim earlier, at the beginning of Perek Daled, when we start counting the b'nei Kahos. Why do we jump in the middle of Bamidbar Daled and start Parshas Nasso with the counting of b'nei Gershom? The logical place for it to start would have been in the beginning of the Perek with the counting of Kahos. Okay, so Nasso would have been a bit longer. Okay, hear that, but it doesn't make sense. Doesn't seem to add up. Why we're starting with the counting of Gershom in the beginning of Parshas Nasso? We should have started the beginning of the Perek with the counting of Kahos. because Kahos is the first one mentioned in the listing of the Levim, Gam lo b'nei Merari. V'yoyse nochen hoya lias hatzcholas haseda hazeh b'dov b'dibur v'yishalch min ha'machane v'ulei also kain aval hishim minyan b'nei Kahos b'seda b'midbar Sinai. For some reason, the counting of Kahos takes place in the end of Parsha Bamidbar v'gershom Merari b'seda Nasso. And yet, Gershom and Merari's counting takes place in our Sedra. So 5 questions, and by the way, the Abarbanel has more. I think it's 8 questions in total. I think Rabbi Beryl Wine always says that it's very dangerous to learn the Abarbanel on Friday night. You're sitting after the meal, normally you're very tired, and you start going through, dozens of questions, and sometimes you sort of drop off before you get to the answers, and you're just left with a lot of questions. So we're not going to do all 8 questions, but we'll try and address the 5 questions. Again, what are the 5 questions? Why? Lomot Tziva, the question number 1, why are we told, why is the order that it is? Why is the counting of Bnei Kahos first before Bnei Gershon? Because Gershon was the eldest, surely he should have gone first. Question number 2, how come in the counting of Kahos, at the end of last week's Sedra, it says, Vaidab Hashem el Moshe vel Aaron? With Gershom it just says, Vaidab Hashem el Moshe, and with Merari neither. Question number 3, why does it say al tachrisu es shevet hakahasi? Be careful not to cut down, to sort of decimate the kahasi sort of strands, but that's not said with the Gershom and not with Merari. And question number 4, why does it say gam heim with Bnei Gershom? And question number 5, how come Parshas Nasso begins where it does? Surely it should have begun at the very beginning of the counting of Kahos. That's the logical place. Okay, so let's go through the answer. I'm going to explain with sort of to all the various questions and resolve all the difficulties. Ein sofik shezochra ha'Torah kan in Yonei Kahas v'Gershom Merari v'lo k'fi zmani toldosom. It's clear that in the end of Parshas Bamidbar, the beginning of Parshas Nasso, we're counting Kahos, Gershom, and Merari not in chronological order, not in order of their birth. Rather, we're counting them according to their jobs, what they're carrying. They, between the 3 families of Gershon, Kahos, and Merari, they're taking all the kelim of the Mishkan. So we're enumerating them according to their jobs. The more important the thing you're carrying, the more elevated is your job. And therefore the Bnei Kahos are most elevated because they're carrying the Oren. And all the kelim of the Heichel, the Shulchan, the Menorah, the Mizbeach, and the Mizbeach Ha'olah. And because of the importance of the items which they are carrying, they are listed first. Because when it came to the counting of how many people there actually were in Shevet Levi, interestingly, Nizkru b'seder Toldosim Gershom Rishon v'Kos Achrov v'Merari b'Achrona, because you see they're counted twice. They're counted when they count how many Levim are there. It actually goes in chronological order. It goes Gershom and then Kahos and then Merari. Because that's just counting them. Avol Kan, says the Abarbanel, Shenimnu Linyan Hamasa, where they're counted according to the work which they've got, what they're carrying in the Mishkan, Zochem Kfi Malas Kas Rishona. And therefore, they're counted Kahos goes first because their carrying is more significant. They're carrying the most important kelim. Next paragraph, Ha'omnam. Nishaladea, the question of course remains, the obvious question, the question is why? Why in fact was the job of carrying the most important things in the Mishkan given to Kahos and not to Gershom? Gershom was the older brother. Just like Levi was chosen for their avodas hakodesh, because they had the prestige that Moshe and Aaron came from them. Well, so too, our Kahos had the good fortune that he was the father of Amram, Aviem, the father of Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. and therefore and therefore as a sort of an honor for Moshe and Aaron, their family, the Kahos, who was the father of Amram, they get the most important job of carrying in the Mishkan. And therefore, Kahos are going to be the ones carrying the most important kelim. And that's why Kahos comes first. And then you have Gershom. They had important things to carry, but not as important as Kahos. What were they carrying? They were carrying the urias, the curtains of the Mishkan, or machseo, and all the coverings of the various kelim, me'eres, tachoshim, for kali hachotze, these sort of things. The achrov, and lastly, bnei Merari, shoy maso yosef pachos, v'shofel me'atzmoi, because their carrying was the sort of the lowest of all the things. Losses crush our Mishkan to carry the beams of the Mishkan, bricha, v'amudav, hachotze, v'adonim, yisedosom, and the sockets and the cross beams and all these sort of things. Hineim kain, nizkru ela mishpachos k'fi malas masom. Therefore, the order in which they're carried is according to the value or the importance of the things which they're carrying. And therefore, and that answers our first question. Our first question is, why are we not doing it chronologically? The answer is because they're being carried according to they're being enumerated, listed, according to the importance of the things which they're carrying. And Kahos are carrying the most important things, the Aron and all the items of the Heichel, and then comes Gershon, they're carrying the Urias, and then comes Merari, who are carrying the Keroshim. So that answers the first question. V'hine, Bot Sivui B'nei Kahos la'Aaron and Moshe. The second question we wanted to know, why is it that when it comes to the Kahos, it's Vaidab Hashem el Moshe ve'el Aaron, both of them are instructed, because it was very important that Aaron and his children would be involved in the carrying of Kahos. Because before the Bnei Kahos arrived to unpack the Mishkan, the Bnei Aaron would come, they would come and sort of set it up beforehand. Because they're involved, and the work which the Kahasim are doing is really paramount. And therefore we've got to be careful with your job, because you're carrying sort of the most radioactive items in the Mishkan. And therefore we need a special warning to them, be super careful, because you're carrying super spiritual radioactive material. Their carrying is sort of more dangerous because of the kedusha of the things which they're carrying. And therefore Aaron and his sons also had to be involved in helping them. That's why Moshe and Aaron are included, and that's why there's a special warning, al tachrisu, be very careful that no one should lose their lives because you're carrying such powerful material. It wasn't necessary for Aaron to be involved in their carrying. Therefore, A, Aaron was not involved, and B, we didn't need the warning of Al Tachrisu. And therefore, says the Abarbanel, we've now answered questions number 2 and 3. How come it says Vaidab Hashem al Moshe ve'el Aaron when it comes to the Bnei Kahos, and how come it says Al Tachrisu? Because they're carrying really powerfully spiritually radioactive material, things which are very Kodesh, and therefore you need Aaron and his children's assistance, plus you need the warning of Al Tachrisu. Mash'enken with Bnei Gershom, Aaron does not need to be involved, you don't need the warning, and Moshe was involved because their thing was sort of the next stage down, but when it came to Bnei Merari, you didn't need Moshe or Aaron because their material was sort of the least significant. Okay, question number 4 and 5 is now addressed in the last paragraph I've got in the box. For your bilti roish nar bezokein. We've got a problem because the younger son, i.e. Kahos, has gone first. He appeared in last week's Parsha. So maybe he's going to sort of lord it over his older brother Gershom. Therefore, the Torah was sensitive to the feelings of Gershom, that he would be put in sort of primary place at the beginning of Seder Parshas Nasso. He'll get that sort of prominence that a Bechor should get. And therefore, we have to put Kahos first because he's carrying the most important things. Why is he getting that? Because Aaron and Moshe come from him, etc., like the Rabbi has explained. However, we don't want to overlook the kavod that is due to Gershom. After all, he is the eldest. And therefore, rather than starting the Parsha with Bnei Kahos from last week, that would have sort of been a bit too difficult for Gershom. Therefore, we conclude Parshas Bamidbar, we count Kahos there, and we begin Parshas Nasso by giving honor to Gershom, who ultimately is the oldest of the three children. That explains also Gam Heim. That's why we're going to count also Bnei Gershom. That means, in the same way that you've given chashivas, you've given in value and importance to kahos by putting him first, well, Gam Heim, you're also going to give that chashivas, that kavod to Gershom by placing him at the beginning of Parshas Nasso, beginning of this Sedra. Of Merori, but Merori, there was never that issue, there was never that concern. And therefore, we've answered question number 4 and 5. Why is it that it says Gam Heim? Why is it that the Parsha begins with Gershom, who is the eldest, and why didn't we sort of put it with Kahos? Why doesn't that begin the Sedra? The teretz is because we want to give some degree of prominence to Gershom, after all he is the eldest, and therefore we break and we put Kahos at the end of last week's Sedra. Okay, he's first because he's carrying the most important things, but Bnei Gershom is therefore put in a place of prominence at the beginning of Parshas Nasso. So very, very interesting insights of the Abarbanel, really just quite fascinating. But I think also an important point that comes out is that whilst Torah is paramount, and the Bnei Kahos have the prominence of going first, despite being younger, because they're carrying the most important items in the Mishkan. Nevertheless, the Torah doesn't want to overlook the honor due to Gershom, and therefore it somehow addresses it by beginning Parshas Nasso with them. Okay, very beautiful idea. Let's move on. Now, Parshas Nasso is full. You then have, after that opening, you then have the Parsha of the Saito, which I'm not going to deal with, but then you have the story of the Nazir. Let's take a look at the next paragraph. It's top of the next page. Parshas Bamidbar Vav, Pasuk Chof and Chof Aleph. V'hei nevei Samar Kohen tnufa lifnei Hashem v'acha yishte hanozir yain zois Toras hanozir. So it's a very enigmatic episode in the Parsha. The Nazir has to refrain from drinking wine, from cutting his hair, becoming tomei, etc. And the pasuk says, "Va'achar yishte hanozir yain." Afterwards, he drinks wine again. Zois Toras hanozir. I came across a very interesting Birchas Avram Erlanger. Zatzal. He died only fairly recently. He was a Magid in Kol Torah Yeshiva, lived in Kikar Shabbos, a tremendous Talmud Chacham, and the author of many, many volumes of Birchas Avraham, which is used all over the yeshiva world. He just addresses a very interesting question. In Moyadim, on Amud Chav Zayin, he's got a Svarim also on Moyadim, apart from on Masechtas and Shas. He addresses the question, why is it that after you have this sort of a Stam Naziris, is 30 days, why is it that after 30 days, the Pasuk says, V'acha yishte hanozir yain? Well, why dafka 30 days? Why then he goes back to drink the wine? Well, what is that all about? So this is what he says, a very interesting insight of the Birchas Avram. V'nirei levai, hadvarim lefi olamenu b'siyata d'shmaya. Hine mevu b'Rambam. He quotes a very famous Rambam in Hilchos Deis Perek Aleph. Ribui hamidus v'sha'onu mitzuvim laleches b'hem b'derech habein l'sayishara. The famous middle path of the Rambam, the golden mean. Ayin Shom halachos Hey Vav and Zayin. The case at Yargil Atzmo, how should a person conduct himself? The opening, the Hilchos Deis Stam, is like a Musa Sefer. How should a person conduct himself? Yasav Yishanav Yishalish B'maisim Sha'iseh. A person should repeat once, twice, 3 times his actions, Al Piyad Deis HaMitzois, through the normal, being normal, the middle path. V'yachzeh bohem tamid, and repeat them many times. Ad sheyihiyu ma'aseim kalim alav. That just by doing them repeatedly, a person will sort of get used to it. It won't become difficult. And all of the good midas that we try and aspire to have, if a person just acts it out once, twice, 3 times, then it becomes much easier, it becomes sort of part of who you are. Getting up in the morning. For some teenagers that I teach, it's very challenging. But once you start getting into it, you do it once and twice and three times, then it becomes sort of almost habit that you can do it. Well, that's what the Rambam says in Perek Aleph, that you repeat good midas by staying on the middle path, and therefore it becomes sort of a part of who you are. However, of a Perek base, next paragraph, the Rambam in Hilchos Deis, Perek base, compares spiritual ailments to physical ones. You should go to Chachamim, who are the spiritual doctors. If there is a malfunction and a person has got some sort of problem spiritually, he needs to go to Chachamim to try and address that issue. Of halacha base kosov in base in Hilchos Deis, he says v'keisat hi refu osam. How do you address a problem, a spiritual problem? Mishu bal chema, someone who is very angry. Omrim lo lahanig atzmei shem huko v'kola lo yagish kal. He's got to go to the other extreme. If a person shouts at him or embarrasses him or hits him, his antidote to his anger is not to respond at all. V'yelech b'derech zuz man meruba. And do this for an extended period of time. Just don't respond at all. Go to the other end of the spectrum. Just don't be sort of cool about it. Don't respond. V'imhu govolev, and if he is very arrogant, that's his spiritual problem. Lo yinhagatzma b'bizoyin harbe v'yeshiv l'matzim lakol. He again should go to the other side of the spectrum, and he should behave in a way which is going to bring disgrace to himself. He should behave with bizyonus, with embarrassments and humiliations, and sit lower than everybody else, because he needs to sort of correct the imbalance. And that is the way to do with all of the deis. So you see that the middle path, the golden mean of the Rambam, is the aspiration. But if there's a malfunction, if there's a problem, a person recognizes that he's getting too angry, he's getting too arrogant, then he needs to go to the other extreme to correct that imbalance. Last two sentences. Hamispoy mizeh, says the Berachos Avram, what emerges from this is shebechol hamoros haros, through all bad midas, say the havodah l'tapel bohem liyashram. The way to correct them is shetkufa musuyemes, for a specific period of time. Or sheyikna midah hatova, he has to. It's in order to acquire this midah tova. Yinig bekotz hasheni. He's got to go to the other extreme. Rabbi Bachai b'Parshas Nasso mefarish al derech zeh ma'da'acha yishta hanoz yayin. That's really what the Rabbi Bachai means in his commentary on Chumash on this parsha. That afterwards yishta hanoz yayin. What does he mean by that? Acharei shenog b'kedusha shleishim yoyim. He has been noig for holiness, the Nazir, for 30 days, which is the specific time needed. Vehevi ar karbonos, and now he's brought his karbonos. Shuv yuchel lishtos yayin. Now I can drink wine again. It's just in line with the Rambam's instructions. I.e., the Rambam says you always go after the golden mean. But if you see a malfunction, spiritually there's something not quite right, you need to go to the other extreme to correct it for a period of time. And therefore a person is very angry, just don't respond at all. A person is very arrogant, bizyonus for 30 days, or for as long as it takes to correct it. Well, so too the Nazir. The Nazir has gone through this period of 30 days of Kedusha, and then afterwards he needs to sort of go back to the golden path of Shuv Yochel Lishtos Yain, of drinking wine again. So a very interesting insight of the Birchas Avraham. Okay, last offering for today, and that is Birchas Kohanim. After all of that, you have the famous Birchas Kohanim. Dabe al Aaron ve'el bonov lemer koi sevarchu es b'nei Yisrael omer lohem yivarech Hashem yishmerecha yashem panav elech v'chuneku yis Hashem panav elech v'yasem nocha shalom. Fine, the famous Birchas Kohanim, which of course Kohanim, these are the words that Kohanim say when they duchen, when they bless the Jewish people. I came across a piece from Rabbi Yisrael Besser. He tells a story of Rabbi David Feinstein. Rabbi David Feinstein, the son of Rabbi Moshe, and it's highly recommend that you read. That's an amazing biography of him. And Yisrael Besser tells a lovely story about Rabbi David Feinstein. That one time a lady came to Rabbi David and said that I've got the worst job in the whole world. The worst job in the world. What could be the worst job in the whole world? So this particular lady Her challenge was that she had 3 daughters, all in their 20s, and they were struggling with shidduchim, difficult parsha, and it was getting her down. And why was her job the most difficult in the whole world? Because she worked in a bridal shop, and there were girls coming in, 18, 19, 20 years old, bubbly, exuberant, excited, and everything seemingly went so easily for them. And Nebuch, this lady, had 3 daughters who were older than that, and nothing was happening shidduchim-wise. So, it's one thing that, this is a heavy weight which she's carrying, but if she works in a bridal store and she sees daily girls much younger than her own daughters, it was very challenging for her. She's got the worst job in the whole world. That's what she told Rabbi David Feinstein. Before I tell you his response, let me just then explain to you a few things about duchening, and you'll see what his response, the wisdom of his response. And we know that here in Chutz La'aretz, sadly, we do not duchen every day. We only duchen on Yom Tov. If you take a look at the box, the Ramah says in Kuf Chof Ches Mem Dalet, in the first, it's a very long siman all about Hilchas Bruchas Kohanim. The Ramah says, Na'agu b'chol medinas elu, she'ein noisim kapayim ele b'Yom Tov. The minhag in Chutz La'aretz is to only duchen on Yom Tov. Why? Mishum she'oz shruyim b'simchas Yom Tov. Because when are we really happy? We can enjoy the simcha of Yom Tov. That's on Yom Tov. V'tov leiv hu yivarech, and the person can only bless when they're in good spirit, when they're in good heart. Masha'en kein b'shah yomim. Says the Ramah, the rest of the year we haven't got that elevated state of being besimcha. Afilu b'Shabbos Hashana, even on Shabbos, shetrudim b'hurim al mechyasom, we're overwhelmed with thoughts about our parnasa, v'al bittul melachtam, and we've closed the shop. V'afilu b'Yom Tov, and even on Yom Tov, ein noisim kapayim ele b'tfilas musaf. When do we duchen? We duchen in musaf, not in shacharis. Sheyotzim oz mi'breis hakneses v'yismuch b'simchas Yom Tov, because we can smell the kiddush. Because in shacharis it's just a little bit too far away, but in musaf, we're going to eat soon, and therefore we're in a heightened state of simcha. What you see from this is that we can only duchen, the Kohanim can only properly bless the Jewish people when they are in a state of simcha. And then when they're in a state of simcha, which for us in Chutz La'aretz is only on Yom Tov and only at Musaf time, that's when it's going to be effective. Now, that's perhaps why Avelim don't duchen. Although it's a debate about it, the Shulchan Aruch says again there in Kuf Kaf Ches, Achas Shiva Yemei Avelis Noise Kapov. The Mechaber says that after the Shiva, an Avel can duchen. Hagar says the Ramah, V'yesh Erim to Kol Zman HaAvelis, Afilu Ad Sof Yud Beis Chodesh Al Avel Imoi. Even in the whole year, for Nebuch, a person is Avelus for his parents, Ein Noises Kapov V'chein Nagim Dinas Elu. That's our minhag, says the Ramah. Now, what do you see from all of this? That Birchas Kohanim, we only do it on Yom Tov when we're in a state of simcha. What did Rabbi David Feinstein say to this person? He turned it round. He said, you've got the best job in the world. You are the luckiest person. How so? Because you are exposed to day in, day out people who are happy. People of Baruch Hashem, they're making a simcha, they're getting married, and they're coming into the bridal store to find a nice dress. You have the opportunity to see people who are really, really besimcha. Go and get brachas from them. Get brachas from people who are really besimcha, because when you're really besimcha, then that means their brachas are more impactful. They're besimcha, they're b'shleimus, and they want other people to have that as well. Of course they do. And therefore you are in the perfect position to get brachas from people who are genuinely besimcha. And that is the advice he gave him. Amazingly, the postscript is that all 3 of this lady's daughters got married within 12 months. And she made 3 shidduchim within a year. People sometimes, they go to after people make a simcha. You want a bracha, go to the Bali simcha, and they're in a state of elevated simcha, get a bracha from them straight after the chuppah. When the Baal Simcha's heart is full, he wants to share that, and he wants to give brachas. That is human nature, and that's really perhaps one of the ideas of Birchas Kohanim. Yom Tov is a happy time, and therefore the brachas given by the Kohanim will be much more effective. Baruch Hashem, we're surrounded by Bali Simcha, and people who want other people to also have simchas. So get brachas from them, because their hearts are overflowing, and therefore the brachas which they'll give you are going to be much more impactful. So what have we said today? 3 offerings. The first was that quite lengthy Abar Benel, but it wasn't the whole thing. It was only the first 5 questions. fascinating approach of how to deal with all the various questions he had at the beginning of the Parsha with Gershom, Kahos, and Merari. Then we did the second item of that Birchas of the Avram Elenga, of the Nazir, how comparing it to Hilchos Deis, redressing the balance, going to the opposite extreme. And then lastly, Birchas Kohanim and the story of David Feinstein.